Almost all inflatable kayaks come with only one skeg or fin. In this video, I explain what you need to buy in order to add additional skegs to the hull of your inflatable kayak. I cover the step-by-step process for adding additional skegs to your kayak. The video also shows how an additional skeg affects how the kayak tracks, how your kayak handles in crosswinds, and how turning the kayak is affected. The main reason that I was looking to add additional skegs to my inflatable kayaks was due to problems with weathercocking in crosswinds. With almost all inflatable kayaks, a crosswind will blow the front of the kayak in the same direction as the wind. So if the wind is going from left to right, then the front of the kayak will be blowing towards the right. When this happens in crosswinds, you have to counteract this by paddling more on one side to keep trying to go straight. The stronger the crosswind, the worse is the effect of weathercocking. Interestingly, with hardshell kayaks, weathercocking causes the bow of the kayak to turn in the same direction as the prevailing wind, which is the opposite to inflatable kayaks. Without going into the technicalities, this is due to the different shaped hulls that hardshell kayaks have compared to inflatables. I was also interested to see how the addition of extra skegs would improve the tracking of inflatable kayaks that I use. Tracking refers to how much the bow of your kayak wavers from side to side when paddling. Regarding what items you need to buy, firstly you need an additional skeg box or base to attach to the hull of your kayak. I've bought a few of these bases which also come with a skeg from Amazon in the past. Secondly, you need some form of strong marine glue in order to attach the additional fin box to the hull of your kayak. I can highly recommend the HH66 cement, which is an extremely strong adhesive, although there are other brands of strong adhesives which you can use, such as JB Marine Weld. A third item, albeit optional, is to have some strong waterproof tape such as Gorilla waterproof patch and seal tape, which you can use to tape around the edges of the fin base. You have to think about where you want to add the additional skeg base on the hull of the kayak. Generally, most inflatable kayaks will only come with one skeg base, which is towards the rear of the hull. Logically, you would therefore be looking to add an additional skeg base more towards the front of the hull to balance this out. You need to consider how you fold your kayak up when you are packing it away. It's important to add the additional skeg base onto the hull on a point which avoids the folds of the hull when you roll the deflated kayak up. If you install the skeg base onto where you fold the kayak, then this will stress the skeg base and likely lead to it eventually coming off. Once you've decided where you're going to add the skeg base, you then need to take your time and patiently measure the midpoint of the hull and mark with a pen the outline of the additional base. It's important you take your time to accurately measure this so that the additional skeg base is aligned with the center of the kayak. If you don't align the additional skeg centrally, then this will likely offset the tracking of the kayak, and you may find that it then starts to veer very slightly to one side or the other as you're paddling along. On the Aquatec Ottawa kayak, I measured the distance between the outer fabric strips along the hull and made sure that the skeg base was an equal distance between them so that it would be centrally aligned. After marking with a pen the outline of where the additional base was to be attached, I then put some tape around this with a view to preventing any excess glue from being left on the hull once I'd attached the base. I then cleaned the area where I was going to attach the base with an alcohol-based cleaner. I very lightly sandpapered the area on the hull of the kayak to roughen it up to help the skeg base adhere to it when glued on. I then used a quite coarse sandpaper to roughen the bottom of the skeg base to help the H66 cement bond to it. Finally, I marked the location of the two holes in the base with a pen so that I could line the base up perfectly when I attached it to the hull. I then applied the HH66 cement to the area where the skeg base was to be attached. It's very important to wear gloves to protect your skin when applying the HH66 cement because it's an extremely powerful bonding agent. I applied a fairly liberal amount of the HH66 cement to the hull, and then also applied some to the base of the skeg slot itself. I then carefully placed the skeg base onto the hull, making sure that it was lined up within the area that I'd already marked out. After double checking the measurements with a ruler, I then pressed down the skeg base firmly and added some bricks to the outer perimeter of the base to apply some pressure and hold it down firmly onto the hull, while the HH66 cement cured. The HH66 cement cures within an hour or so, but it takes about 24 hours to reach its full strength. After the cement had set, I cut some strips of Gorilla waterproof patch and seal tape and secured them along the edges of the skeg base. I forgot to film this when I added the skeg base to my Aquatec Ottawa kayak, So the footage shows me taping around the edges of the base that I added to my Sandbanks Style Optimal kayak. This is perhaps an optional step, but it's probably advisable to help to protect the edges of the skeg base. You should in fact round the edges of the tape as shown here so that there are no pointed corners, which could start turning up if they catch on things that the hull rubs against. Here you can see the Aquatec Ottawa kayak with the additional skeg slot added to the front of the kayak, and the existing skeg that the kayak comes with towards the rear of the kayak. In order to try and illustrate the effect and tracking of adding an additional skeg, I compared some drone footage that I took from when I only used one skeg on the Aquatec Ottawa kayak, and compared this with footage of when the kayak had the additional skeg attached to the front of the hull. While it is not at first glance obvious that there is a big difference, if you watch the footage carefully, to my mind it appears that the kayak veers more from side to side with only one skeg fitted compared to when it had two skegs attached. What I will say is that as soon as you attach a second skeg to the front of your kayak, you will notice straight away when paddling that it runs straighter with the second skeg. While I appreciate that this is anecdotal evidence, you do definitely notice the kayak tracking better with two skegs compared to one skeg. It's a bit like the difference when you remove the skeg off your kayak in order to paddle in a shallow river. You'll notice straight away that the tracking is poor without the skeg, although it does vary from kayak to kayak. The Aquatec Ottawa is a flat-hulled, full drop stitch inflatable kayak which tracks generally okay, with the included one skeg towards the rear of the hull, but the additional skeg I added to the front of the hull led to a noticeable improvement in tracking. I also have some footage comparing the tandem version of the Sandbanks Style Optimal kayak being paddled with the one skeg that it comes with, compared to it being paddled with the additional skeg that I added towards the front of the hull. The Sandbanks Style Optimal is very similar to the Aquatec Ottawa, but the hull on the Sandbanks has a slight ridge running along the keel. As a result, it tracks a bit better than the Aquatec Ottawa, and adding the additional skeg to the Sandbanks Optimal did not have quite the same level of improvement in tracking. Nevertheless, there was still a noticeable improvement in tracking by adding the additional skeg to the front of the Sandbanks Optimal kayak. Regarding weathercocking, with the additional second skeg fitted on the left, I was able to paddle normally on both sides while maintaining a straight course. By comparison, with only one skeg on the right, I had to constantly paddle only on the left side to fight against the crosswind, and in the end it still started to spin the kayak, and I had to correct this by back paddling. The second test on a different date shows a similar result, with me having to paddle only on one side due to the crosswind when the kayak only had one skeg fitted. When I stopped paddling on the left with two skegs, it still kept going straight, while on the right you can see the kayak fitted with one skeg starting to spin in the direction of the wind. On this test you will see that when not paddling, the kayak when fitted with two skegs on the left kept relatively straight, while on the right when fitted with just one skeg, the kayak spun slowly due to the crosswind. You can see the scenery behind me moving as the wind spins the kayak on the right. The final test I did was to see how the additional skeg affected the turning circle of the kayak. In summary, it was taking me about 7 paddle strokes to turn 90 degrees to the shore with one skeg fitted, while it was taking about 11 paddle strokes to do so with two skegs fitted. The takeaway from this is that if the type of paddling you do requires you to often turn, such as whitewater kayaking, then having the additional skeg may be a disadvantage because you can't turn so sharply. While the additional skeg that I added to the Sandbanks Style Optimal kayak did reduce weathercocking when I used it on windy days on the sea, I found that after about a year or so, the skeg base started to come away from the hull and I had to remove it. I think this is because the skeg base did not adhere as well to the small ridge which runs along the middle of the keel of the Sandbanks kayak. You have to attach any additional skegs to flat areas of the hull. I added an additional skeg base to the middle of the hull of the Aqua Spirit kayak in order to use the Hiqmar E-fin electric kayak motor that I'd bought with it. The motor does not seem to fit the proprietary fin slots which are on the Aqua Spirit inflatable kayaks. I therefore had to attach the same type of standard skeg base to my Aqua Spirit kayak that I have on my other kayaks. Finally, I've bought some of these smaller skegs to be glued onto the hull of some of my kayaks for use on shallow, fast-flowing rivers where the water isn't deep enough to use the longer skegs. As you can see, fitting additional skegs to your inflatable kayak is a relatively inexpensive modification which can significantly mitigate the problem of weathercocking in strong crosswinds and also improve the tracking of your kayak generally. If you found this video useful, then consider giving me a thumbs up and subscribing by clicking on the left below if you've not done so already. Click on the right below to be taken to the playlist of my other kayaking guides.